Happy Saturday, everyone, and welcome to Man Cave Morons. It's our recent podcast episode. Kind of in a little bit of a lull here in the sports world. It's All-Star Weekend in the NBA. Free agency in football hasn't started yet. Spring training for baseball is starting up. So it's kind of a slow information weekend. The Olympics are on. College basketball is getting going. But it's kind of a ho-hum last couple of days, if you will. I got a few topics to get into today. So let's just start with mid-season NBA report. Like I said, it is the All-Star break. The slam dunk contest, three-point contest, skills competition will be tonight, and the All-Star game will be tomorrow. And the only question there will be, will it have 400 combined points? This is one of the worst All-Star games of the major sports, probably right behind football. No defense is played. It's just bad to watch. Bad basketball. Not something I enjoy watching. But let's get into kind of the mid-season standings, how things are looking, and kind of possible predictions of where I think teams might end up and where we might be looking at a playoff picture. Let's start in the East. Toronto is the number one seed, followed by Boston and Cleveland and Washington are your top four. No surprises there. I think those are the three best teams in the East. Early season for me, I had Boston being the one seed, but Cleveland coming out of the East as the Eastern Conference champions. I still believe Cleveland's going to come out of the East. Toronto has had a wonderful year. Whenever it gets to be playoff time, Toronto seems to collapse all the time. Boston's a team that's kind of going in the wrong direction right now, even though they were 40-19. Which, given the fact when you lose Hayward that early in the season, you kind of thought they might have a little bit of a collapse, but they had a great beginning of the year. Kind of hit a rough patch there for a little while. I think the All-Star break is coming at the right time for the Celtics. This is a team with a lot of young players, and it looks like these guys are hitting the wall a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how they start off the second half. Actually, it's more in the second half, and we were 59 games in here, so it's not a true, second half of the season. But I think Stevens really needs to get this squad rested, refocused. I mean, Kyrie is playing phenomenal, but they're starting to look like the Celtics of last year with just one guy. They haven't had Marcus Smart for a little while, so obviously getting him back will help. But guys like Brown and Tatum, are they hitting a wall a little bit? And people always say, well, how can these young athletes hit a wall? Well, you think about it, in college, you're playing a little more than 30 games, depending on how far you go into your conference tournament, how far you go in the NCAA tournament. You're playing fewer minutes, but now, Tatum's 59 games in, playing a lot of minutes compared to what he's done prior to that. So these guys do hit a wall. So it will be interesting to see how the Celtics come out in the second half. The team that I think is, really moving in the right direction, and I know it's only been a couple games since the trades, but the Cleveland Cavaliers, those trades seem to have re-energized them. They're 4.5 games behind the Celtics earlier this week when I said they were 5.5 behind them. I want to see come mid-March how they've closed that gap, because I think they are going to close that gap. They're 6.5 behind Toronto, but again, I think this right now is the best team in the East. So I see Cleveland closing that gap, and, things can happen. There definitely things can happen and things can change, but I think right now the Cleveland Cavaliers are the best team in the East, and I think we're going to see that play out over the next couple of months. Going through the rest, Washington, Indiana, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia are all a game and a half apart from each other, and that's 4 through 7 right there. So there's a lot of battle for the bottom half of the East. Miami currently is the 8th seed, and they got a little bit of a cushion against Detroit. I think there's only 9 teams in contention in my mind for these 8 playoff spots. Detroit right now is that team on the outside looking in. They've played well since the Blake Griffin trade. It'll be interesting to see how they can play in the second half of the season with Blake. Be interesting to see how Miami does with Dwayne Wade. They've already played pretty well, and they've got some good pieces, so that'll be interesting to see. But I think the top three teams are the top three teams, and I don't think there's anyone out there who's going to knock any of those teams off. But I do feel that Toronto will probably come back to the field a little bit. The Celtics, the rest, hopefully, re-energizes that team, and they can make a second half push. But I do believe Cleveland is the team in the East who will win the East and potentially, might be the number one seed going into the playoffs. But at the very least, I think they are the team to win the Eastern Conference. Out west, there's more teams involved. Looking at the standings, there's probably 10 teams battling for those 8 spots. Houston locked up the one right now. They locked it up, but they're number 1 seed as of now. Golden State, San Antonio are your 2 and 3, and then Minnesota, Oklahoma City's 4-5. And, New Orleans is 8th right now. They're half a game ahead of the Clippers and a game and a half ahead of Utah. Clippers have played well since the Blake trade. Utah's been playing very well. So it'll be interesting to see, how these teams, do they keep this momentum past the All-Star break? How does New Orleans play the second half without DeMarcus Cousins? And can they hang on to that 8th and final spot in the playoffs? I think the West is a lot more intriguing. I think it's intriguing from the bottom half of the standings, but I also think it's intriguing for Golden State. A lot of people right now are saying Golden State's playing possum. They're bored. They're just, they're doing their thing. Steve Kerr's handing, the clipboard to Draymond. Here you go. But yet, Kerr will sit there in the postgame interview and say, well, we need our focus back, or, we need to have the All-Star break so we can re-energize. And I don't like Steve Kerr. I'm not a big fan of his antics because I like Pop because Pop's direct. But I think Steve Kerr has given you a lot of BS, and he's kind of toying with people as well. But this Golden State team, can they just turn it on when they want? And that's a concern, and that's a problem. Is can they just turn it on? And if you're playing a team like Houston, or you're playing a team like San Antonio or OKC, if you keep this score close into the fourth quarter, those teams can hold on and beat you, and they can come back and beat you. So I'm not sold that Golden State is, the runaway favorite and they're just toying with everyone right now. I feel a lot more comfortable in Cleveland in the East than I do Golden State winning the West. So, the second half of the season is going to be very interesting to see and watch how this plays out. Can Houston continue this momentum? Can OKC gel and figure it out? Will Kawhi come back to San Antonio and, help give them a push? I mean, right now, Houston and Golden State are half a game apart, and then there's a 10-game spread. So I don't see any team cracking that top 2. But, if Golden State finishes second, that means Golden State would potentially have a first-round matchup with Portland, which I'm not saying Portland's going to beat Golden State, but Portland can push Golden State. Then there would be a second-round matchup with San Antonio, which, again, will be difficult. And if Kawhi's back, that could be a very interesting series. And then the Western Conference Finals would be against Houston or OKC, Minnesota. I mean, depending on how things played out, but based on what things look like now. So to have to play Portland, San Antonio, and Houston to get to the finals, that's a pretty big stretch. So I think the West is a lot more competitive than the East. I don't think there's a lock that the Warriors win the West. If I had to pick right now, I'd probably pick the Warriors and be the Warriors and the Cavs again. But again, I feel a lot more confident in the Cavs winning the East than the Warriors winning the West. And all those teams in the West, there's not an easy out. I think there's easy outs in the East. I don't think there's easy outs in the West. So looking at things right now, I would say, Houston or Golden State will be the 1 seed. Golden State will probably win the West, but I think it's going to be fun to watch, and it's going to be interesting because if OKC can continue to gel and figure things out, if Kawhi comes back for San Antonio, those are going to be some interesting teams. If Utah can sneak it, Utah could be an interesting team for a team like Golden State to play in the first round of the playoffs. It might be more intriguing than the Pelicans because Utah is young and athletic. They got some good players. So those are the things to kind of watch for. I mean, right now, I guess I'd have to go with Cleveland and Golden State, but like I said, I feel a lot more confident that Cleveland will take the East and Golden State taking the West. And it's going to be interesting to see how these teams, the teams that made moves, how they continue to gel going forward over the next couple of weeks. And the teams that stood pat, didn't make moves, can they continue doing what they're doing? And then obviously you have the injury situation. We can never tell when someone's going to get injured, and that's going to be something to watch out for. So I think for the Cavs, the next couple of weeks, like I said earlier, are very telling, and they'll be fun to watch and see if they continue to gel and keep this momentum going. But from midseason, I don't think there's a lot of surprises. I think Celtics are probably the biggest surprise based on the injury to Hayward in Game 1. But other than that, I don't think there's any huge surprises in the NBA right now. I think teams are kind of positioned and seated where folks thought they would be, and it's really playing out and looking forward to an interesting second half. And really, we've got 59 games in for some teams, so you're only looking at 23 games left in the season for a team like the Celtics. So like I said, it's not truly half the season, it's a lot more than that. So looking forward to the second half, and as you know, we'll be monitoring basketball quite closely over the next couple of weeks. The next topic to get into is Kirk Cousins. Free agency for football starts in the middle of March. I think it's around March 12th or 13th is when we can start seeing free agent signings. With Garoppolo signing a big deal in San Fran, with Alex Smith getting traded to Washington, it really changes the landscape for the quarterback situation. So what is going to happen with Kirk Cousins? Where's he going to end up? And there's a lot of options out there. There's Denver, there's Phoenix, there's Jets, there's Buffalo, there's Cleveland, there's possibly Jacksonville. So where does a guy like Kirk Cousins go? And there's a lot of people in national media right now are talking about the Jets, which I find interesting. I'm not sure if I'm Kirk Cousins, do I want to go to the Jets? I think Cleveland's got probably a little better upside given what they have. Don't know if Cleveland wants Kirk Cousins. The other thing to throw in there is now that A.J. McCarron is a unrestricted free agent. He won his case against the NFL, and he's now cleared to be an unrestricted free agent. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Denver's got some salary cap issues. It sounds like they're going to have to move some people in order to sign a guy like Kirk Cousins. The Cardinals have no one at quarterback, so I think that would be a natural fit. The Jags have got issues with Bortles now because of the injury. They have to keep him on, and I just don't think they've got the room to carry a Bortles and a Cousins to make a signing like that, given the amount of money they're going to owe Bortles. So I think you'll see Bortles coming back for one more year in Jacksonville, and them making the decision going after that what they're going to do. So with that being said, in my mind, I think it's really 3 teams that are in the Cousins sweepstakes, unless you see Denver move a lot of people, and that would be the Cardinals, the Browns, and the Jets. Which one of those 3? I personally think if I'm Cleveland, I make the push to get him. You got the first pick, you got the 4th pick. You failed miserably in the past selecting quarterbacks. Why not take a known commodity? Pay him the money. You have room under the cap. You have a lot of young talent who's on rookie deals, and I think you could quickly turn this team around. You have a Josh Gordon. You have a decent, some decent running backs, some decent tight ends, some young players on defense. I think a Kirk Cousins could quickly come in and not necessarily make you a playoff contender right away, but could come in and change the landscape of this team. And if you could sign a Kirk Cousins, that gives you a little more flexibility with your draft picks. I think they should take Saquon Barkley out of Penn State, even though Penn State running backs historically are miserable in the NFL. I think they should take Barkley with one of those picks. If you took Cousins, you then could potentially move one of those picks to acquire more picks, more players, and really get 2 or 3 starters out of this draft early. If you put Barkley in that backfield, they got Duke Johnson, who is a good 3rd down back, catches the ball out of the backfield. Those 2 could be a good combination. Josh Gordon in there at wide receiver with a Kirk Cousins. Then you start to see some progress. And I think Hugh Jackson being someone who works well with quarterbacks, he needs a good quarterback. I mean, Deshaun Kaiser, I don't think is that guy. I think unfortunately they passed on some good guys that they could have had. So if I'm Kirk Cousins, I look at Cleveland. If I'm Cleveland, I look at Kirk Cousins. I don't see, I know a lot of people like the Jets. Bowles did a great job with the Jets this past year. They definitely overproduced, considering people thought this was going to be a 0 or a 1-win team. They went out there and they were competitive every week. And they have some nice young pieces at the skill positions. But I just don't see the Jets as being that close when I look at a team like Cleveland and the amount of assets they have, and it really looks like they're missing a quarterback. I mean, if you look what Jimmy G did going out to San Fran, they didn't change anything other than Jimmy G, and he rattled off 5 wins. They didn't go out and find a new running back or a wide receiver. They just changed the quarterback, and everything else just fell into place, and they went 5-0. So Kirk Cousins could do that in Cleveland and really change the dynamic. Where does A.J. McCarron go? I don't know. Is A.J. McCarron going to really command a lot of money? Could he stay in Cincinnati and, bide his time there until they figure out what they're going to do with Andy Dalton? Could he go to Cleveland because he does have a relationship with Hugh Jackson, and maybe Cleveland's like, we can get McCarron for cheaper than a Cousins? We're going to know that in less than a month, like I said, in March when things open up. But there's not a lot else to talk about in football right now, so talking about Kirk Cousins is really the only thing and where he will end up. And I think if I'm Cleveland, I look at him closely. If I'm Kirk, I don't think I want to go to the Jets, and I have no idea what Phoenix wants to do. But there's going to be a lot of movement, and there's going to be a lot of availability because there's teams out there who need a quarterback. And as we've seen, you don't need a great quarterback if you have the pieces around him like Nick Foles, produced. But you need a quarterback who can go out there with some confidence, can read some defense and make good decisions. And Kirk Cousins has done a good job over the last couple of years with very little weapons in Washington. So I think a team who's got some weapons and wants to turn their program around quickly, Kirk Cousins could be that guy. So again, we'll see where things land in the middle of March, and we'll definitely be talking about it when we get there. The last thing to talk about today is the pace of play in Major League Baseball. This is something that's been coming up a lot in the last couple of seasons with spring training starting. I figured, hey, let's it's a slow weekend. There's not a lot going on. Spring training starting. Let's take some time to talk about a general topic here, and that's pace of play. Manfred came out recently. They're gonna look into this. They're gonna talk about it. There's been talk about the pitch clock. I personally don't think the pace of play in baseball is an issue. Baseball is a wonderful game. It's probably my favorite sport. But when I go to a game, and this is the one piece I don't understand. I go to a game, I'm dropping a couple $100 to go to a game. I don't want that game to end in an hour and a half, right? I mean, I want to get my money's worth. If they're going to charge me $10 a beer and they're going to charge me $5 a hot dog, and $6 for a 20-ounce soda, I want to get my money's worth out of this game. So the pace of play thing to me, I just don't understand. And is baseball struggling? I think they're struggling in some markets. I don't think they're struggling in Boston. I don't think they're struggling in New York, St. Louis, Chicago, San Francisco. I think there's some markets where baseball is really strong. Houston. And, it is a long season. It's 162 games. And, yeah, it's hard to get that commitment to go to a game for 3 hours, and 81 home games it's very difficult to sell out. But I think what people have to start looking at and what teams have to start looking at is a little retraction, right? It's a business. The bottom line here is to make money. Why does Fenway Park sell out? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, the Red Sox are competitive for the most part, and they've had a great run here over the last 15 years, and they're a competitive ball club, so that draws people. But two, they play in an intimate ballpark. It's a historic ballpark. It's a small ballpark. They've done things to expand it and put seats where they can, but going to Fenway Park is an event. You go to Toronto, when Sky Dome opened up, now the Rogers Center, that was an event. That thing sold out, and they had some really good teams. They had those teams that were making the playoffs, teams that were competitive and going to the World Series, the Joe Carter team, and they drew. Well, now it's a cavern of a stadium. They're not ultra competitive. It's not an event that people really need to go to because everyone's like, I've been to the Sky Dome. Who cares? It's now, again, you can walk up game day and get a ticket to pretty much any game. So I think what needs to happen is these ballparks that were built, if teams are building ballparks now, they need to build them smaller. It's not let's build a 60, 70,000 seat stadium. It's let's build that intimate 35 to 45,000 seat stadium. Let's make it an experience to go out to the ballpark. I've been to Fenway several times where people aren't watching the game. People are sitting there reading newspapers, or they're reading magazines, or they're on their phone, or doing whatever. But it's an event. They're at the ballpark. They're at Fenway. They can say they've gone to Fenway. They can tell their friends, their family, whatever it is. It's an event to go to Fenway. It's not an event to go to the Rogers Center. Team's not that great, and the venue's terrible, and I don't have to. It's not competitive. It's a simple supply and demand. So there's a demand to go to Fenway, and the supply is smaller. So I think that's the thing these teams need to figure out is we need to stop building these huge stadiums, first of all, because people are saying, well, the pace of the game is affecting attendance, and I don't think that's the only reason. I think there's a lot of things that affect attendance. The NFL football games last over 3 hours. They have no problem getting people into those things. But yes, there's a difference because now you're looking at 8 home games instead of 81. You can fill a 75,000, 80,000 seat stadium because you only have to fill it 8 times. Major League Baseball, when you have to fill it 81 times, you're not going to fill that large of a stadium. So I think first step is these stadiums, if there's going to be new ones built, the size has to be put into consideration. I mean, you've got to look at it from a business standpoint there. 2, the TV revenue is still there. I watch a lot of games on TV, listen to games on the radio. Now, honestly, am I committed to from the first pitch to the last pitch? Not all the time, but every night the Red Sox are on, I'm turning that game on in some shape, form, or fashion. Now, I might not turn the game on until 8 o'clock because, well, I need to have people, my wife go to bed or, some kids go to bed because they don't want to watch the game. So I'm not turning it on 7:05 for the first pitch, but I might be turning it on at 7:45, 8 o'clock, and then I might be catching an hour or so of it. So I'm not giving that full 3 hours, but I'm still committed to some segment of that game. So I think the ratings on TV aren't terrible. They're still getting some decent revenue. But I don't think it's the pace of the play. I think there's quality of play. There's competitiveness of teams. When a team's competitive, the fans are going to tune in. I mean, we saw what happened in Cleveland when the Indians got competitive. When the Indians stink, no one goes. When the Indians got competitive, people started tuning in. They were watching the game. So are there some things they can do to tweak it a little bit? I don't know if I'm a big fan of the pitch count. I don't want to ruin the integrity of the game by speeding it up. There's talk about limiting the number of times a catcher can go out to the mound. There's talking about having timeouts. Just other things that you can do to speed up the game. And maybe there's things you could do in regards to if a pitcher's warmed up in the bullpen and you're bringing him in, he doesn't need to get more warm-up pitches from the mound, and I realize the mound's different and there's all these other things, but I think there might be some things, but what are you really gaining at the end? You're not gaining a ton. When pitchers are striking out batters, the game's going to be longer. That's just the way it is. A game where there's 20 strikeouts, it's going to be a longer game because guys are taking more pitches. They're looking at more pitches. There's more strike calls. So that's going to lengthen the game. The automatic intentional walk was nice, but how many times is there an intentional walk in a game? Like, how much is that really speeding up the pace of play? So I'm not really concerned because, again, I look at college football, I look at professional football. Those games are lasting 3 hours. The crowds are there. The TV watching is there. The revenue's there. I think really you need to work on improving the quality of play on the field, um, changing the dynamic of the stadiums, and I think you've seen that, going back to a more intimate stadium where you're not trying to sell so many tickets. You're making it an event, and and the other thing that you can kind of do is if you're worried about, they're worried about people tuning out. They're worried about people a younger generation who's not going to a game. Well, the younger generation is looking at the game in different ways. So baseball needs to get a little bit more tech savvy. I know people who watch games, on their phone, who maybe follow a game cast instead of actually watching the game. So there's different things, tech initiatives that Major League Baseball can do to attract the younger fan. But I don't know if you're ever going to attract the younger fan to watching the game, even if it's only 2.5 hours, even if it's 2 hours, because younger fans just aren't watching a lot of things, or they're watching things differently. So I don't know if cutting 10 minutes off from the length of a baseball game really is going to save that much or attract that much more. But again, I think quality of play on the field is the big difference. So I'm not a huge fan of this whole pace of play. We got to find a way to cut these games under 3 hours. When it's a good competitive game, people are going to tune in. And again, like I said, if I'm going to the game and dropping a couple $100, I don't want the game to end in an hour and a half. I want to get my money's worth. So I don't think baseball has quite the issue that they think they do, because I think this is a generational issue. People aren't watching TV the way they used to. I mean, you look at stuff like Netflix, right? People are watching TV on Amazon Prime. They're watching on Netflix. They're not watching the TV the way they used to. They're watching it on a device, or they're watching YouTube. So you have to change the way you're presenting your product in order to gain that market share back. And again, it's the quality of product. It's the way you're reaching out to kids. Baseball historically, doesn't do a really good job of marketing their players. You think about it, this is a game where you see everyone's face. I mean, they're coming up to bat 3 times a game, 4 times a game. They're out in the field. They don't have a face mask on. You can see them. And I think baseball has always been a very regional sport. And like I said, the pockets, Boston and New York, Chicago and St. Louis, Kansas City, San Fran, these areas have always been hotbeds of baseball. And, everyone in New England knows everyone who's on the Red Sox, right? I mean, you see their face, you know who that person is. You know them more than, the offensive line of the Patriots if you were to see their faces. So, in those regions, players are known. Baseball is followed very closely. It's not a national game. People in Arizona probably don't know people on the Red Sox and are following them. But in the world of football, people know everybody. People in Boston know who Larry Fitzgerald is playing for Arizona. And they know his face. If he doesn't have his helmet on, they know who he is. They know they know the dreads. They know who this guy is. So, that's another thing baseball has an issue with is there's stars, but these stars aren't known nationally. And baseball needs to find a way to fix that issue. And then I think you're going to capture more of the younger people. I mean, if people know who Bryce Harper is all across the country, that's a great thing. But I'm not really sold on this baseball is dying because of the pace of play. I think there's a lot of other things baseball needs to work on in order to capture that youth market. I go to minor league baseball games frequently, here in Vermont, and when we lived in Maine, going to the Sea Dogs games. There's a lot of kids at those games. And there's a lot of kids at those games because there's a lot going on at those games. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of food. There's a lot of, there's the mascots walking around through the stadium. There's a lot of in-between inning things going on. And the younger crowd is there and they're entertained. Now, do they stay for the whole game? Maybe not. But again, once you get the ticket dollar, once you get them in the building and they're buying concessions and they're doing things, they're having a good time, their attention span might not be enough at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old to wait 3 hours. But at the end of the day, they're still interacting with the game. They're still seeing the game and growing up, and they're having those memories. So I don't think the issue is as bad as Major League Baseball thinks it is. I do think they need to realize that they are a regional sport. They need to do whatever they can to push these stars like the Bryce Harpers and the Mike Trouts and push them nationally. So there's more of these guys being seen in these regional parks. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's a big problem. I think every industry is evolving and it's changing. TV, radio, music, it's all changing. It's all evolving. But you just have to continue to put a good product out there. And it's had its ups and downs. Baseball has always historically had fluctuations. And I think continue to work on the quality of product, smaller stadiums, get that experience. It's the customer experience. And the Red Sox have done a wonderful job with that in Fenway, putting in the monster seats, putting in all these other seats. It's an experience to go to Fenway. And these stadiums really need to make an experience. And again, the Cubs sell out, Cardinals sell out, the Red Sox sell out. And the reason these teams sell out is because they have a huge following. They have a huge fan base. They have a generational fan base. One of the biggest issues with baseball in Florida, to me, has always been Florida is a transplant state. A lot of people are moving to Florida from other parts of the country. Their loyalty is with their team. So you have a lot of people from the Northeast who move to Florida. Their loyalty is with the Red Sox or the Yankees. They're not going to go down and become Tampa Bay Devil Ray fans, or Rays now. So that's an issue. So Florida needs to, overcome this issue. And it's gonna be generations. It's gonna take a while of kids growing up in a household where we like the Rays, and it just goes and goes and goes. You go to a Rays game, if the Yankees are in town, if the Red Sox are in town, there's a lot more crowd there than when they're playing, another team. And that's just because, again, you have that transplant population. So it's going to take some work. And again, I think, we can talk about Tampa Bay, but I just don't think it's a good fit for Tampa. And I think that's what baseball needs to realize. They need to realize, where's the fit? Where can we strategically put teams? How can we strategically build stadiums that make economic sense, that we can continue to grow revenue? We can continue to put fans in the seats. But again, it's quality of the game. If the game is good and what the product you're putting on the field is good, people are going to go and watch. People are going to tune in on TV. And again, you might not capture that whole 3 hours, but you're going to capture a big chunk of it. So that's just my 2 cents. I think this pace of play thing is extremely overrated. I don't think baseball needs to do anything too drastic because, again, at the end of the day, I don't want it to affect the quality of play. And if a pitch clock, or limiting visits to the mound ends up, interrupting a pitcher or causing a pitcher to, play poorly, it's going to have an adverse effect on the product, and that's not what Major League Baseball needs. So that's so we're going to wrap that up there, leave that there for now. I hope everyone enjoys their weekend. Watch some Winter Olympics, some college basketball, NBA All-Star game tomorrow, Sunday. We'll be back at the beginning of next week. Hopefully there's some news over the weekend. Maybe we'll just pick another random topic to talk about. But again, please pass this along to friends, family, co-workers. Push it out there. Push out the Twitter feed, ManCaveMorons, the Facebook page. Let's try to get as many people as we can listening. And please, again, give some feedback. Feel free to email mancavemorons@gmail.com. Send me an email. Maybe there's a topic you want me to talk about or something that interests you, and I'll definitely take a look at those. So, again, enjoy your weekend, and thanks for tuning in.